Okay, in the graphical approach, one issue we have is that when we calculate the net benefit, so the gross benefit minus the cost, lots of this gross benefit happens way in the future, and it's hard to compare it directly with something happening now. So would you rather receive, to illustrate this idea, would you rather receive $100 now or $100 10 years from now? So most of you are going to say you'd rather receive $100 now. And that's because we are impatient. And if we have the money now, we can do stuff with it. If we don't get it for 10 more years, we're going to have to wait to do stuff with it in the future. Okay. And so there's a method to kind of try to discount these future amounts. Okay. So let's take a look at this. And this method it's known as present value. Some of you might have seen it if you've taken any class related to finance or financial valuation. So we're going to calculate the present value. We're going to assume you're doing one more year in school. Okay, so this is like maybe a 1-year master's, okay, or starting to work immediately. So let's take a look. So right now there's two costs. So you're in year 0 because you're at the beginning. There's two costs. You have the direct cost of the year of education, that's C. Okay, so how much money do you have to pay right now in tuition? And these 1-year masters tend to be quite expensive. So you might be paying like $50,000 or $40,000 in tuition and other costs. Okay, we wouldn't count your cost of living there unless there's a difference between the cost of living if you're working and the cost of living if you're going to school, because either way you have to live. And then this other one is the earnings you would make if you didn't keep going to school. So this is how much could you make if you got a job? Okay, so how much does it cost you to go to school and how much could you make if you got a job? So E is your opportunity cost for being in school, or as we called it earlier, the indirect cost. So then B is the earnings with one more year of school. So you go to this program, how much you're going to earn. And then B minus E, so the next year you get out of school, you start earning, then we can think of B minus E as the gain. So in the first year out of school, how much did you make and how much would you have made if you had just kept working? And then the second year, B2 minus E2 is the gain from year 2 and the gain from year 3 and the gain all the way. So maybe you work for 35 years, so there's going to be 35 of these entries. And every one of them, you get some gain from this extra education, hopefully. If there's no gain, then it's not a good financial decision. It might be a good personal decision if you have non-monetary reasons. Now, what's this bottom part? Well, the bottom part is reducing this future payment. Okay, so it's adjusting the value of this future payment. So like, let's suppose 10 years from now, you're going to make $10,000 more a year than if you hadn't got the extra year of school. So 10 years from now, you're going to get but this happens 10 years from now. Okay, so we can't compare it directly with $10,000 from today. We have to do something called discounting. Well, how do we discount it? We say, well, how much money would I have to have now to be equivalent to that amount? Okay, and so one way to do it is to use the interest rate. So you say, well, if I put money in the bank now, how much money would I have to put in the bank now to keep it for 10 years in order for it to be equal to 10,000 at the end? Okay, and the way to find that is by dividing by 1 plus the interest rate, and then the power is for how many years in the future. So if it's 1 year in the future, then it's not compounded. 2 years in the future, then it's compounded twice, right? And 3 years in the future, etc. So this is called present value. And then it converts everything in the future to make it comparable to now. And if it's greater than 0, then your investment is worthwhile because it means you've not only covered your direct costs, but you've also covered all your opportunity costs. And you've also adjusted for the fact that some of these payments happen way in the future. So if this is greater than 0, then it means these costs are smaller than this benefit, even after you adjust the benefit for happening in the future. Okay, so there's some problems with this. It assumes that we have perfect knowledge, which we obviously don't. Okay, so it knows not only your future incomes are known, but your interest rate is known and constant. Okay, so these are not known. So this decision always involves risk, but still, you can get a rough, what we would call maybe a back of the envelope kind of estimation of this to see if it's a good decision. So I want to show you there's another way to do it. And so the other way to do it is using the same formula. You say, well, at what interest rate would a person be indifferent between putting their money in the bank or going to school? Okay, putting their costs in the bank, so to speak, to earn interest. So this gives you, it basically says, well, what is the rate of return of education? Okay, so I'm not going to get into with you about the method of it, because the method is quite complicated, and I'm not sure that you want to know that much. But so internal rate of return, it measures the rate of return education. It's basically saying, well, what interest rate would make us indifferent between the two? So, and then you can compare this rate, internal rate of return, and again, this is commonly used in business and finance, to the actual interest rate, and you can decide whether or not it's a good idea to invest or not. So if the actual interest rate was smaller than internal rate of return, that means go for it, invest in education. Education is giving you a better return than you could get in something else. And if the actual interest rate was bigger than internal rate of return, that would mean that you would be better off by not getting this extra education and by instead putting your money in the bank and getting to work. Okay, this is the idea. And that would also be respected by using the current interest rate. It would make the present value to be negative. Okay, so let's estimate. Let's look at some estimates of specific values of the internal rate of return for education. And we're going to look at some values across different countries. Before you start, you might think, you might pause for a second and then just kind of think, well, which level of education is going to bring the biggest gains? Okay, rate of return, biggest rate of return. So primary school, secondary school, or higher education. Okay, and the second one is, so this is rate of return. It's not absolute gain, but rate of return. So maybe pause, think about that for a second, make a prediction, and we'll come back and look. All right, so here we are looking. So there's two rates of return. One is the social rate of return and one's the private. So the private is the one you're concerned with. That's you. Social is different because social includes two things. One, it includes all the costs that the government pays for, even though you didn't pay for them, but somebody pays for them. So those are included in the social rate of return. So the rate of return is going to be lower because of including those costs, which many of the costs of education are not paid for directly by the people getting the education. And the second one, social rate of return, would also include the value of any positive externalities that education brings. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this. This is a little bit old data, but you get the idea. So private rate of return, first of all, rates of return were higher in sub-Saharan Africa than in the other places. For example, rates of return were higher in sub-Saharan Africa than they were in the developed countries, were quite a bit lower. Okay, that's one thing. But they're relatively high in all the countries. I mean, 12% rate of return is a great rate of return. So if you're getting 12% over a long period of time, that's way better than the stock market, the bonds market, any other thing. Also, it tended to be that primary education had the highest rates of return compared to the others. Now, and this is the private rate of return. Some of you might think, why? Like, you don't make very much money with it if you just finish primary school and start working. So why does that have the highest return? Well, one thing to think about is what's your investment in primary school? So in primary school, the investment is very small. So first of all, your personal investment, if you go to a government school, your personal investment in terms of direct cost may be zero. And your personal investment in terms of opportunity cost is also really low, right? So the rate of return for primary school is very high because opportunity cost is low and direct cost is low, okay? So that's the basic idea. As you get to secondary school, it may still be that your direct financial cost is low, but your opportunity cost starts to rise. And by the time you're in college, there's significant opportunity cost and there's significant direct cost. Okay, so this is the idea. Now, once we go to the social rate of returns, these all drop, and the reason they drop is because of the cost paid for by the government. And they have to include this when calculating the social rate of return. But we can see, though, clearly education is a good investment for the most part.